Hello and welcome. Setting a scope is arguably the most critical part of any assigned project or audit. If not done adequately, it can expose the audit or function to various risks, particularly the risk of not reporting a significant error, misstatement, or control weakness. By establishing an objective, you give more practical purpose and sense to your objectives set earlier. Today we are discussing Standard 2220 engagement scope. This standard will link the engagement objectives to the engagement scope. So as per our practice, let's start by first asking some interesting questions and then try to get answers to these questions all along the line when we will review this all important standard. What must include in the engagement scope? What if consulting opportunities arise during an assurance engagement? What to do if there are reservations about the scope in a consulting engagement? Can you cover everything in an assignment? What factors to consider when internal auditor establish the engagement scope? And how drafting a scope statement is helpful? And the last but not the least is how is scope limitation considered? If you're new to my videos, this is Tausif Mushtaq, an audit strategist, control specialist and board advisor with over 2 decades of experience in governance, assurance, risk and controls, fraud examinations and forensic reviews. The objective of my videos in the audit and assurance series is to promote the internal audit profession in its basic spirit, whereby the internal auditors having a clear understanding of the standards and IPPF overall, so they can contribute to achieve the mission of internal audit. The mission of internal audit as defined by the Institute of Internal Auditors is to enhance and protect the organizational value by providing risk-based and objective assurance, advice and insight. So the basic requirement of Standard 2220 engagement scope is that the established scope must be sufficient to achieve the objectives of the engagement. So what must include in the engagement scope? As per the assurance standard A1 of 2220 explains us that the scope of the engagement must include consideration of relevant systems, records, personnel and the physical properties, including those under the control of third parties. So what if consulting opportunities arise during an assurance engagement? Assurance standard A2 of 2220 guides us on that. If significant consulting opportunities arise during an assurance engagement, a specific written understanding as to the objectives, scope, respective responsibilities and other expectations should be reached, and the results of the consulting engagements communicated in accordance with the consulting standards. What to do if there are reservations about the scope of the consulting engagement? The standards C1 and C2 guides us. In performing consulting engagements, internal auditors must ensure that the scope of the engagement is sufficient to address the agreed upon objectives. If internal auditors develop reservations about the scope during the engagement, these reservations must be discussed with the client to determine whether to continue with the engagement. As per C2 of 2220, the standard, second consulting standard, during consulting engagement, internal auditors must address controls consistent with the engagement's objective and be alert to significant control issues. A question can be asked by junior auditor or anyone which is being audited that can you cover everything fully in an audit? Internal auditors are required to establish an engagement scope that is sufficient to achieve the engagement objectives. So here we are linking it with the objectives. So objectives are very important to set first, and then you will establish scope in line with those objectives. So the answer is maybe yes, but you shouldn't. The engagement generally cannot cover everything. Internal auditors must determine what will and will not be included. So factors to consider are, when internal auditors establish the scope, that the boundaries of the area or the process in scope versus out of scope areas like locations, sub-processes, components of the area or process, and the time frame given. As per implementation guide of Standard 2220 engagement scope, to attain an understanding of the key risk identified during the planning phase, internal auditors typically review the planning considerations. You may refer to an implementation guide of 2201, planning consideration and engagement objectives. Both are covered in my videos. This allows internal auditor to achieve a thorough understanding of how best to link the engagement scope to the objectives. It is important for internal auditors to carefully consider the boundaries of the engagement, as a scope must cover enough breadth to achieve the engagement objectives. So what is in a scope statement? How we can draft it? And what will be and will or will not be included in the engagement? So it includes the boundaries of the area or the process, in scope versus out scope, locations, sub-processes, components of the area or processes, and the time frame. The time frame may be based on the point of time, a fiscal quarter, a calendar year, or another predetermined period of time. And you have to keep in mind that, again, because we are not normally covering fully everything in an audit, and that is because you need to have enough resources and time and everything, and it is not a best utilization of your man days to spend everything and cover one area fully, rather than addressing key risk areas and focusing on those and spending your maximum time on those key risk areas. To ensure that the engagement, the scope is sufficient to meet the engagement objectives and aligns with the organization's annual internal audit plan, the internal auditors must use sound professional judgment based upon relevant experience and or supervisory assistance. When determining the scope, it is helpful for them to review the engagement objectives to ensure that each objective can be accomplished under the established parameters. So what to do in case of scope limitation? Internal auditors generally consider and document any scope limitations as well as any request from the client or stakeholders for items to be included or excluded from the scope. If internal auditors encounter scope limitations, these must be reported in the final engagement communication. Establishing your reliance on the work of others. At times, internal auditors may place reliance on work performed by others, such as external auditors or compliance groups within the organization, and it may be useful to document such reliance in the scope statement. Standard 2050 Coordination and Reliance and its implementation guide provide further guidance on the internal audit activities reliance on such work. So let's conclude what we understand from this standard. We understood what engagement scope is and how to link it with objectives we set earlier. What to do if consulting opportunities arise during an assurance engagement. What to do if there are reservations about the scope in a consulting engagement. Why coverage of an engagement is not widespread for all areas, big or small. What factors to consider when internal auditor establish the engagement scope. How drafting a scope statement is helpful. What is a scope limitation and how it is considered. And can an auditor rely on the work of others? And let's understand what documentation is required to demonstrate conformance with the standard engagement scope 2220. The description of engagement planning process in the internal audit charter or the internal audit policies and procedures, which typically explains how the scope is defined. The engagement work program approved by internal audit management generally shows whether the engagement scope adequately aligns with the objectives and addresses the key risk identified. The scope statement is clearly documented in the engagement's final communications, the planning memos, signed approvals, engagement announcements, and the notes from meetings during which the scope was discussed. So thank you so much for your time. Keep liking my videos, share my videos with other friends who are also in the field of internal audit or who are students and learning this subject, so they can get benefit from my videos. Thank you so much.